I do want to get us started. I want to welcome you all again. I am Caitlin Stevenson. I see some people who joined me for our last session a couple of weeks ago. I'm so happy that you're joining us again. And for those of you who are new, really glad that you have decided to spend some time with us here. So the session today is, sort of follow on our last session. So if you didn't attend the last session, that's okay. We'll make sure that I provide a recap so that there's some context for what we're going to focus on today. But I'm glad to see from the poll that a lot of you are wondering, like, how do I make my application stand out? And, when we were brainstorming topics for the webinar series, we wanted to think about what obviously people want to know, what our clients and what prospective applicants want to know. And so that's probably the question that I was asked most when I was leading admissions at Georgetown, but also since I've been on this side of the desk is, how do I make myself stand out? How do I create a compelling application? Like, pretty basic question, but not as direct or straightforward of an answer. And I often say in admissions, there's rarely one clear answer to a question because so much of it depends. So we're going to talk about how to figure out for you what that means. And so the title of our webinar today is The Value of Introspection. And this is the process that I think sometimes people fly through without really thinking about, ironically enough. But it's probably one of the most important parts of the process because it really does lay the groundwork for what you're going to produce in a tangible way. And, as someone who managed admissions committees for years, it was always clear to me when people had spent time on this part of the process. And it was very clear to me when they hadn't. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means concretely. But keep in mind that that's like the kind of bigger picture of how this fits into the process and how this is going to ultimately get you to the end of creating that really strong process and standing out. So just a really brief overview before we dive into introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about, what this means. I'm going to recap a little bit of what we talked about last week. I'm not going to review everything. If you're interested in getting that recording and hearing that, you're certainly welcome to reach out to me. We're going to focus on the framework that we use here at MBA Link to help you with this introspective process. So that will be the way that we talk about a lot of these concepts. And then obviously how you can do it, how you can execute it on it with us, obviously, as your guides, but even on your own as you're beginning to explore. I see from the poll, so many people are early on in their process. And so there are tangible, actionable things you can be doing right now to position yourself for this introspective part of the process. And then, of course, we'll have a Q&A, ask questions. You're welcome to submit them on the chat. It's a little tricky, I find, when I'm in presentation mode and sharing my screen. So I will try to get to those at the end, but also I think we have a intimate enough setting that you can, at the end, we can just open it up as well. So with that, I just introduced myself briefly, but why should you listen to us, right? There's so many admissions people out there. Everybody's an expert. And certainly people have their own vantage points and their own perspectives. And so what I want to do is help you understand the lens through which I am presenting and thinking and sharing the information that I have. So my name is Caitlin Stevenson. I'm not going to read everything that I've done, but my background is in admissions, both at the undergrad and most recently for the past 15 years at the graduate level. I know I don't seem that old, right? I don't seem old enough to have worked in both for so long. But I managed admissions for years. I was on the institutional side for most of my career. My family moved to Asia about 4 years ago. Because pandemic and everything else, we're now back in the US. So I'm based here in Washington, DC currently, but we were living in Taiwan, which I absolutely loved. I was able to make it down to Singapore a couple of times a year for events and to meet with clients and things like that, which was really exciting. But my perspective is from the institutional side. So you'll hear me say we or us, and I am no longer on the institutional side, but so many of my very good friends and colleagues are still leading admissions at all of these top programs. And so that is, I sometimes slip back into that, but that's the real expertise that I bring, is having a broad perspective on applicant pools through the years. Obviously, it's different from school to school, but there are some fundamentals, ways of thinking about the process, ways of reviewing and evaluating applicants that is really helpful, really across the board. So that's what I'm going to focus on, being able to share. And then the last part of just what I want to talk about is my move from the institutional side to, I always say, this side of the desk, and that is consulting, working with clients. the joy for me is that, so often I'd be on leading an AdCom and I'd think, gosh, I wish this person would have told us more about this, or gosh, I wish they would have presented it this way. And now over the past 4+ years, I've been able to actually do that through my client work with MBA Link, really helping clients not only avoid the pitfalls, because there's some pretty obvious ones that with a little bit of coaching can make all the difference. But importantly, being able to emphasize what is really positive and notable about their application and about their candidacy. And sometimes candidates will say, yeah, but I don't feel that special. I don't feel that unique. Like I'm, from this particular country, I've got this academic background. Here's what I want to do. I feel like I sound just like everybody else. And on the surface, that might be true, right? Like there aren't going to be, most admissions folks at this point have seen a little bit of everything, but only you have the story that is yours. And that sounds fairly obvious, but sometimes you need an objective person to help you pull out the threads of what that is and how to put it together. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I will allow Leslie, I've been doing all of the talking, but I promise that's not going to be the way the whole session will go. So Leslie, why don't you take it from here before I do the real brief overview, and then it will be yours to dive into.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to meet you. And thank you for your time. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. And this is a lot of fun for Caitlin and I to get together and share what we love doing with prospective clients and folks who are just interested in exploring further education and really trying to explore the opportunities to advance your career. So I'm Leslie Taylor. I am sitting in Hong Kong right now and have been in the Asia Pacific region about 20 years in 2 different stints. And I've lived in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore. But I've traveled the region extensively. My career has been largely in 2 big buckets. I've worked in the corporate sector for over 10 years in the US and in Asia across several different functions. And that's really helpful when I work with our clients who want to be financial analysts, who want to be customer facing, or who want to be in an entrepreneurial setting. So in large part, I've done many of those types of roles. And it's really, as I said, sort of advantageous for me to have that really deep understanding in terms of the kind of work that folks want to do when they're in their internships in their MBA program, but also when they're finished. And then the second part of my career has been in higher education. So I attended Chicago Booth for my MBA, and then I ended up working for Chicago Booth here in Asia for about 6 years. And that was my first job in graduate management education. And I worked in Asia representing the school and building really deep and long-lasting relationships with employers. So that's another great value. So Caitlin's got this whole front end of the process, and her expertise is deep in that part, where my deep expertise is really on the employer side and coaching students and talking about curriculum and building, really building an understanding of what curriculum means in terms of helping you achieve your career goals. So I think between the 2 of us, you've got, I believe, you're in really capable hands. And then most recently, I finished my doctorate program, and I specifically studied employability perceptions of MBA and specialized master's students who were from mainland China and studying in US programs. And that was a 3-year program, and my findings are quite unique and of interest, and hopefully will be published in the next year or so. And so again, I bring sort of that academic scholarly viewpoint as well, in terms of when we think about employability, it's actually multidimensional. And if you're thinking about an MBA or specialized masters, we also work with folks who are looking at, even PhD programs. Ultimately, we're thinking about careers. And so I believe, and I hope that I can bring that extra lens in terms of deeply understanding what employability means to all of our clients, and really making sure that the F.A.M.E process covers all of those bases for you. So that is me.
Yeah, great. And just to clarify, Leslie and I work on a larger team of other people who have expertise in the different areas
Mm,
that they coach. So just as a point of reference, you're going to hear a little bit more about F.A.M.E and about this process of introspection and, clarifying your client, your narrative as you're or building your narrative as you are creating your applications. But we also have resume coaches, essay coaches, interview coaches, and all of them have the relative expertise in those areas as well. And that's really important as you're thinking through this process, how you're going to do it, who you're going to, try to leverage to help you with that process, and the backgrounds and vantage points that they have. So keep that in mind, whether you're working with MBA Link or looking at other consultancies, or maybe you're not sure if a consultant is the way to go, and that's okay too. Hopefully the session will help you understand the ways in which consultants might help you. Maybe they won't. Everybody's different. Everybody has a different need. So just wanted to emphasize that. So before we click this, just a really brief recap. All of you have probably heard, even those of you who are early on in the process exploring, that it's a holistic review process. And I use that word more than I want to because I think it's an overused term. I think it's helpful in the way that I conceptualize it is to think about this holistic idea in two primary dimensions. And the first is quantitative and the second is qualitative, right? And so as admissions folks, they are crafting a class using both dimensions. And that's important to understand because many people that we work with, probably most of you, are looking at highly selective MBA programs. Or master's programs. And what that means is that the quantitative piece, which is sort of the numbers, the nuts and bolts behind your application, many people are hitting those profiles, right? Like the mid-range, the mid 80% ranges that most schools are going to publish. And so, your undergraduate performance, your test performance, whether it's GMAT, GRE, the EA, the executive assessment, more schools are taking now. It's understanding what your aptitude is, what your demonstrated record of success is. And frankly, the question that the AdCom, the admissions committee, is asking, is this person academically set up for success and to be qualified to, be in our program? And the answer for most people in a highly selective candidate pool is yes. We don't have academic concerns that this person's going to come and be an academic risk. And so what accounts, not all of those people obviously are going to receive an offer. And so what accounts for that difference? That's really the second dimension. And so for most people, that's where the focus needs to be. And the qualitative I often talk about is the kind of touchy-feely part of your application, right? It's your story. It's who you are beyond your numbers. And so that's everything from what you present on your resume in terms of your professional growth, development, record of success, as well as all of those other aspects to who you are, your interests, what gets you up and gets you excited in the morning, what's led you to this part of the process where you're now applying for graduate school and you think this is the right next fit, the way that you articulate those goals. All of that packaged together creates this qualitative dimension, in addition to, I didn't mention this, but how other people view you through recommendations, and then obviously how you present yourself in an interview. And so I think it's important just to really briefly understand this, because the introspective part of the process is where the majority of you are going to need to focus your energy. Obviously GMAT prep, obviously if you're taking additional coursework to show your quantitative aptitude, that's all important. I don't mean to say that it isn't. But in a highly selective pool where you've sort of got the numbers, whatever that means, all of the other pieces in the qualitative dimension are going to really require a lot of your time and energy, and it requires a lot of thought. And so that's where we're going to start our session today, is how do I start to think about how to present the qualitative? The resume is one piece that's a little bit more concrete, although I'm going to be doing a separate session on that as well. But beyond that, the story, and I keep saying this idea of narrative, this is how you stand out, is to think about not only what you're going to choose to tell about yourself, about your story, but how you're going to tell it. And that's really where you have to do a lot of the thinking before you can think about packaging it up. And the way you package it up is through the application process. So with that, Leslie, I want to pass it back to you to talk about how we approach. And again, I mentioned this is MBA specific in that we have this very concrete framework and way of guiding people through this introspective process, but the concepts are really consistent across the board. So Leslie, I'll hand it over to you to talk about that and hopefully give people a sense for the areas where they can focus with our assistance, obviously, but even beyond if they're not quite there and ready to dive into a coaching relationship yet.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And I just wanted to let everyone know I have some notes here that I'm going to be glancing at from time to time. So that's what I'll be looking at because I want to make sure that I don't forget to tell you all everything. So bear with me if you see me glance down. So the big part of MBA link process that I work in is a 4-session module, and we call it F.A.M.E. And it's an acronym for fit, abilities, your motivations, and then your experiences. And this was designed by MBA Link, really as a framework to promote introspection, reflection, and analysis of your past, professional, and personal experiences, plus your future hopes and career goals. So as Caitlin alluded, it really is this deep thinking process that will require some effort on your part. So the goals of this F.A.M.E. process, and again, there are 4 sort of 1-hour sessions, are to, what I always say, build the bones of your content that you could ultimately use in conjunction with working with an essay coach in your applications and your interviews. So I'll get into a little bit more of what that will look like in the next slide or two, but that's just the overall idea of F.A.M.E. Our clients benefit from F.A.M.E. Regardless of the program type. So we work with clients and really, as Caitlin alluded, going to really aim for those elite MBA programs, not only in the US, but in Europe and in Asia. We also work with clients in specialized masters, PhD programs, executive MBA programs. So the F.A.M.E. process is beneficial to you regardless of the type of program. And maybe you're still thinking about a couple different kinds of programs. The other thing that our clients tell us, and we get feedback from clients, is that they really view this as sort of a life coaching experience. So after F.A.M.E. is done and after they've submitted their application and we circle back with them months later, what we're hearing is, boy, that was quite useful. And I think I can use that going forward in really long past my MBA program. And for that, I think certainly I'm very proud, and I think the whole MBA Link team is too. So I think we're on to something special here. So we can go on to the next slide.
Yes, sorry, I am my little controls are a little off, so I'm going to stop clicking around. I hope that's too distracting.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the first 2 letters in F.A.M.E., the F and the A. So fit is the first session, and it's maybe one of my favorites because fit really means fit 2 ways. How do you fit with your target schools? And we mustn't forget how the schools will view you as a fit for their class. And so most of our clients will come in, and maybe you have, and you're looking at rankings and you're talking to friends and family about which schools are the best for you, and you create a list, and that's necessary and it's important. But the kind of your target list of schools from your angle is not the whole story. So fit really does focus on why the school is a right fit for really advancing your career goals. So we want to think in terms of beyond brand name, for example, or friends and family, or maybe even geographic location. A number of our clients have said, hey, I just really want to be in New York. And there's a couple of schools in the New York area, and that's where I want to be. So we kind of unpack that to really understand if the schools in New York are the ones that will offer you the right curriculum to advance your career. So that's the general idea around fit. And we think about curriculum that the programs offer. We think about faculty expertise. Maybe there are faculty doing cutting edge research in the business area that you're most interested in. That would be a huge draw to consider a school. And so there are lots of different considerations when we think about fit. The next part is abilities. And this is really thinking about what am I good at and why am I good at it? So that could be, what are your strengths? And this self-awareness of your strengths and weaknesses is really going to be crucial to your ability to convey to the admissions committee why you're the right fit for their program. It will do much more as well. So for this second session in the F.A.M.E process, we use an assessment tool called Clifton Strengths Finder. And you'll do this sort of at home before we meet. It's a 45-minute online assessment. You'll get a report back, and then there will be an exercise document that you'll fill out, and really looking at sort of your 5 key strengths and thinking about how these strengths may have influenced decisions that you've made in your personal life, in your professional life, and really trying to get an understanding of, you know, now that I sort of know this, am I seeing any patterns? Am I seeing any trends? For example, why am I gravitating to these kinds of roles? Or why do I find this particular industry really intriguing? Or maybe this is why I failed at a particular career pursuit. So really having a good understanding of your strengths will be very, very helpful as you begin to kind of piece together parts of your application. Sorry, parts of your content. And I see a camera.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm having some tech issues.
No problem, no problem. So I want to say a side note on failures. And I mentioned failure in terms of when you know your strengths and you can think about how they played in decisions you made and maybe how they might have played into failures. One thing that I hear often from our clients is, and you know, rightly so, sometimes we're not really comfortable talking about mistakes that we've made, but I'm here to tell you that we are all human and we all made mistakes. And so this notion of failure, I read this once and it's really true. Failure is only failure if you did not learn from the experience. And so for me, I say failure plus learning equals growth. And I encourage you to get your arms around this and embrace this, because these are the kinds of stories. This is the part of you, as Caitlin was mentioning earlier, that the admissions committee want to know. They want to know your experiences as you begin to think about how can I distinguish myself from the pack, from the people who will share much of your profile, the stories that maybe are harder to tell, but tell a lot about who you are. That comes through during the F.A.M.E process and many times during the strengths and weaknesses discussion. So a little bit more on abilities and then we'll move on. So think about the strengths in terms of also how would my strengths benefit me both in an MBA program and then after I finish the MBA program, really launching into my career. And then we will spend a little bit of time talking about your areas of improvement. That's the nice or other way of saying your weaknesses. It's super important. What are your weaknesses, but also thinking about, well, what are the skills or knowledge gaps that you have? Maybe you don't know you have them. And during the F.A.M.E process, we'll be thinking and talking a lot about this, that the MBA program will fill. What are the gaps in your skills and knowledge that the MBA program or specialized master's program or whatever program you're looking into will fill? That's really important. This idea of the program filling your skills and knowledge gap, tying it to the school's curriculum, really begins to kind of lay the foundation for your narrative, for your story. This is who I am. This is where I want to go, but I need the toolkit with A, B, and C in order to get there. So that's a lot about abilities.
Leslie, can I just add on to one thing that you said that I think is really important? So you were talking about, and I love the idea of failure plus learning equals growth, and the notion that you know, admissions committees are going to probably see some of these perceived weaknesses, whether it is the GMAT. You know, people often say, well, I just don't test well. That can all be very legitimate. Or maybe you have had a lot of job changes or perhaps a layoff, and especially over the past year plus now, there are circumstances that you may find yourselves in, and that might not be a direct failure on your part per se, or it might. But the important thing is to be proactive in addressing it, because the admissions committee is probably going to see it. And so I think Leslie's point is a really important one, not only in terms of a way to stand out, but the best defense is a good offense, right? And the other piece of that is that it's a really prime opportunity to show that you're self-reflective, to show that you're a problem solver, to show that you have experienced growth, because that's what they want to see. They know everybody is putting their best foot forward with their application and highlighting all of their strengths. That's sort of a given. But the other piece of it, because it's what you're going to experience in business school, is how does this person deal with setbacks? And we've all been dealing with setbacks in many different ways over, like I say, the past year, especially. But that's just the human condition. And so as much as you can be honest about that and show that you're thoughtful about it, and that you've drawn some insight, and been better because of it, that's going to bode very well for how the admissions committee is reviewing your candidacy, versus hoping they don't see it and trying to gloss over it, which I've seen people do. And then you leave the admissions committee guessing. And it's like, well, why did they get laid off? Or why did they make so many job changes? Was it because they couldn't hold the job? Was it because they didn't have the attention span to like really dig in? And do they not have the grit? So you don't want them asking those questions. And that piece is just really important. So Leslie, I'm glad you talked about that, but I can't emphasize that enough from an AdCom perspective. If it's done well and done right, that can be the thing that sets you apart in a really positive and constructive way.
Yeah, I'll just round that out by saying I have worked with many clients who have had what we would typically think some sort of red flag, a low GPA, lost a job, something like that. And they're a little reluctant to share it with me. But we finally get out, my rule number one is share everything, because it's really important to know everything about our clients. But I always say, as Caitlin was saying, you want to own that red flag. You want to be able to state and be able to articulate what that red flag is, how it came to be, and what it's, everything about it, what you learned, how you addressed it, why it happened. You don't want the AdComs to be speculating about that. So you want to own it right up front, very straight on, hit it straight on. And that way it's out in the open and there's no discussion anymore. It's like, oh, okay, well, that sort of makes sense. And that also is an opportunity for the AdComs to really learn about maybe some experience in your life that did not go as you planned.
Leslie, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm thinking of maybe you have an anecdote or somebody who was able to own that red flag. I love that phrasing, because I think that's a really proactive way to think about it instead of being nervous about that, weakness or that area for growth. I'll give you a second to think about it, but I'm thinking about a client that I worked with who had like 4, maybe 5 different job changes over like a 6-year period, enough where it was like, I looked at it and I'm like, ugh, this is very concerning. And again, working with a consultant, if you're not sure, that's your safe space, right? Because I'm like, you can say it with me the way that it really is. And then we're going to figure out how to articulate and how to package it up. Not in a dishonest way. Obviously, you want to always be honest and forthcoming and authentic, but in a way that will highlight the positives. So in this particular situation with this client, he was, very reticent to want to talk about it. And I said, hey, tell me what the real deal was here, the good, the bad, the ugly, and then we'll figure out what to do with it. As it turns out, he was an international student initially in undergrad, had gone to the US, he had secured his H-1B1, and then because of all of the changes in legislation, he kept losing his visa, and it was through no fault of his own. And in fact, the companies were trying to refer him to other companies who could sponsor his visa to renew it because he was so good. So something that actually he was really kind of paranoid about, I was like, oh my gosh, that's a really important story, because there were factors beyond your control. The AdComs understand that, especially in the US when you're talking about the H-1B1 process, which you may or may not be familiar with. But and the other piece of it was an opportunity for him to show he was so good that these companies were trying to find ways to keep him in the industry. And so once I understood that, I was able to help him talk about it in a much more compelling way, where it actually showed he's not a liability. He's so good. He just had to deal with these circumstances that were beyond his control. And then the last piece about that was really compelling for him, man, he had a lot of grit because he was able to make it work 4 different times. and just pick himself up every time, as opposed to just saying, you know what, I'm going to just like pack my bag and head back home, where he probably could have been pretty marketable. So I share that as an example because I think it's not uncommon when there are job changes, and maybe yours isn't because of visa issues. Maybe yours is because there were, I don't know, personality issues, or there could be any number of reasons that you may feel a little bit insecure about. But the point is there's a way around that, or a way to go through it in a constructive way. So Leslie, I don't know if anyone comes to mind, and it's fine if not, but I find those anecdotes are really helpful because you're not alone.
Yeah. So the low GPA is one that I come across more than once.
Yeah.
And there have been several of my clients that I've worked with. One client in particular had a very low undergraduate GPA, and she simply just got a little derailed her first year in college. She went away from home. She was from Asia Pacific, was in another country, and there were some extenuating circumstances, and she got completely derailed academically and picked herself up and ended up graduating with a really good GPA. But that first year was pretty horrible for her on a number of reasons. There were some health issues and again, some extenuating circumstances. But once we really peeled the onion to understand where she came from, sort of the whole entire experience that first year, that was, for this particular client, a huge growth year. And so she could talk about this incredible journey that she'd had this first year, and lots of other parts of her life happening around her that she didn't necessarily have control of. But that's a great example of sort of setbacks that we will all encounter. And I'm sure that everyone on this call has encountered a setback, a time in your life where you planned something and you got derailed for whatever reason. And so that part's important. What's equally important is the recovery. How do you recover from that? And that's what the AdComs want to know as well. Okay, well, we can relate to getting derailed. It's happened to everyone, but how do we recover from it? And so that's the low GPA is one that I've come across a few times. Mm-hmm. So should we dive back into motivation and experiences? So the third session, we will focus on motivation, and it's really two questions. Why do you want the MBA, or insert your program, specialized master's or whatever, and why now? So during motivation, we'll continue to kind of reflect on your career journey and consider what the MBA is going to do in terms of really launching you in the direction that we want to go in. We'll go back one slide.
Sorry.
There are a number of degree programs out there nowadays, right? There's online programs, there's campus, of course, everything's hybrid, but even the most elite schools are offering online programs, certification programs. So it's really important during the M or the motivation session to dig deep into why you feel, and we'll use MBA for just this discussion, why you feel that the MBA and not any other program is the appropriate program for you. And why now in your career, really considering the timing in terms of what happens if you don't do the MBA? What would your career path be if you didn't get in your school? Would you be a stronger candidate if you postponed 1 year to get more work experience? These are parts of the discussion in terms of motivation that we'll discuss during the third session. And I always tell our clients to avoid this herd mentality. Oh, I'm going to get the MBA and I'm going now because all of my friends are going. And my parents are putting pressure on me. Shouldn't I be going too? So while I know that's difficult sometimes when all of our friends are going, I encourage anyone who's thinking about an MBA to think about your story and your career, and really thinking about the timing. Is now the right time for me? Because it will be crucial for you to be able to articulate that in your essays. If you're going and you're not super confident that now is the right time, I think the adcoms can kind of see through that. So we want to make sure that the timing is right for you. And then finally, experience. This is the last session, and it's really pulling everything together: fit, abilities, motivations, to really determine what are the most significant experiences that you've had in your life, both your personal life and your professional life. So the content that we develop will be, many times, is based on your personal life. Sometimes I work with clients, I've worked with many clients who've shared with me parts of their personal life that have been fantastic or have been more difficult. And so don't feel like if you have less, for example, work experience, or if you don't feel like your work experience is, more senior enough, there can certainly be lots and lots of content from your personal life that could be equally as valuable to the adcoms. So some of the themes that we talk about and the experience, and you will be actually writing 4 essays, 4 sort of mini essays, vignettes, is our last session. In terms of kind of these general ideas, who are you as a person? Many of the schools will have this sort of question. They really want to understand, as Caitlin was saying earlier, that quantitative piece. Okay, the numbers fine, the data points. We want to know who you are as a person. And a second very common theme that we see is on leadership. So what leadership or followership abilities or experiences have you developed, or do you want to develop? A sort of third broad theme that we see on many of the applications is sort of, tell us your significant accomplishments in life, or that learning experience. Remember when we talked about when you got derailed? And that can be equally as compelling. I think, I'm a real believer in this. Sort of, what happened? You made a plan. You made plan A. You ended up going with plan B. Did you get derailed? Maybe it ended up being a better option. I'm not sure. But what happened? Who was involved? What course of action took place? What was your role in it? And what did you learn? And then sort of the fourth very broad common question that we see a lot of is, tell us about the greatest influence in your life. It could be a person, it could be an experience, and what impact that person or experience has had on you in your life, and why. So that's these 4 sort of very broad themes are what we commonly see. And we'll focus the last session on writing 4 vignettes that generally will follow that framework.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Leslie. And one thing I do want to add that relates both to motivation and experiences, but I think is important, especially where we are right now, as a just everyone, humanity, right? Thinking about how the pandemic fits into all of this, I think that especially as I'm working with clients now, and even the tail end of the work I was doing with clients, making sure that your motivations, I would imagine the experience that many of us have had over the past year, obviously is informing all of the decisions that you're making. But what you want to make sure of is that you are not defaulting into business school or graduate school, especially an MBA program. And so, maybe you were laid off, and maybe the reality is that you don't have another job. And so now's the right time for that reason. That's okay. That's not necessarily how you would articulate, your motivation. And so you just want to be mindful of that. And that is very specific. I remember, gosh, at this point, what was it, 10, 15 years ago, when, bear stearns had gone down, the world economy was imploding in 2008. And many people, the result was to go back to business school. The admission cycle tends to be countercyclical with the economy. Most of you probably know that. And so obviously, as people are being laid off, as many different factors are influencing their lives, going back to business school oftentimes can be a right next move. And that's happening again now, obviously within a different context of the pandemic, but it's important to think beyond that. Adcoms know that, and they know that the reason why many of them are seeing a huge explosion in their application numbers are for some of these reasons, but you want to have something beyond that. And so that's really important. Same thing with your experiences, thinking about the I don't even know what the word is, the challenge, the difficulty, the struggle that many people have experienced over the past year, thinking about what does that mean for you? is going to be really important, because so many people are going to probably be writing about my experience with the pandemic. And that's not to say that that's not a very legitimate experience to write about, and that has been formative perhaps for many of you. But to think about, how do I do it in a very, personal way that goes beyond sort of the cliche. And I don't mean to say that the pandemic is a cliche, but in the sense that it's something that so many people are writing about and thinking about. And so you want to think about making it as personal and customized as possible. And so I'd imagine, Leslie, it'll be interesting as we're working with this sort of second, group of applicants applying during a pandemic, what that's going to look like. But I just encourage you to really think about that and be able to think about how you're going to move beyond that.
Yeah, good.
So at this point, we're going to open it up for questions, but a lot of times people are like, well, concretely, okay, so what does that mean? Where do I begin? Well, certainly you're welcome to reach out to us. I have our contact information. You can email me. We provide customized free consultations so that we can give you a sense for, like, how do things look right now? Where do we think our coaching can really help meet your needs? Help you identify what some of those needs are, depending on where you are in the process. And then, we have different package options that you can, everything from a comprehensive that includes the F.A.M.E. all the way to just an hourly, if you just want to get help with one aspect of the process. And then, you would be working primarily with an admissions director. It would probably be me, who will then coordinate your coaching team, and you have a whole team, behind you. So I don't mean to fly through this, but want to be mindful of time and want to make sure that we have an opportunity to answer any of your questions. I know we sort of threw a lot at you. Hopefully we were able to do it in an organized way so that you have a couple of nuggets that really you can think about and ponder a little bit more. But is there anything that we didn't address related to this idea of introspection, thinking about the different dimensions of your candidacy, that we can answer for you now? This is where, and I apologize if I've been clicking around, I'm having some tech issues with Zoom today, but if you want to just unmute yourself and ask a question, you're certainly welcome to do so. I am not able to easily access the chat. So if someone's entered a question in the chat box, unfortunately, I'm not able to see that right now. So I'll welcome your question.
There's one question in the chat, and I'll just
my alarm letting me know to keep us on track. I'm sorry, I thought I had that down a little bit lower. Go ahead, Leslie.
I'll just share this, and it's a question about the deferred admissions program. So many of the top MBA programs now have this new sort of vehicle, this new structure where you can apply during your undergrad with some sort of guarantee of admission, based, sort of contingent on some period of work experience in between. And so the question is around, how do you explain the timing? I think if you're applying for the deferred admission program, that is in and of itself an explanation of what you're thinking. You're thinking that I'm already thinking forward. I've been researching MBA programs. It's something that I can see that I'm going to need. Again, you want to think about, where am I today? What skills and knowledge do I think, without having worked yet, do I think I might need going forward? And an MBA program from ABC Business School actually has a lot of core competency in this area that I'm very interested in. So therefore, I'm going to go ahead and apply. Again, contingent on, I'm going to work for 3 years. And I'm sure that the schools, I'm not intimately versed in the structure of these deferred programs, but I'm sure the schools have some milestones that they need you to achieve in terms of making sure that you will be admitted in that deferred period. But I think that, again, there's no need for great explanation if you're indeed applying for that. Again, it's sort of the same idea. It's why is the school a fit? Why the deferred program? Why is it a fit? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What do I think the school is going to fit in terms of what gap is it going to fill? And I'm going to work in, I'll just say, product management for 3 years. Not sure I'm going to like it, but I think I am. But then I do plan to go ahead and pursue the MBA because I know I'm going to want to really beef up in certain areas, again, of my skills and knowledge. There's some tools that I don't have in my toolkit that I'm not sure that I'll get. Is that helpful for the folks who were interested in the deferred programs, and just sort of explaining explaining the timing?
Yeah, the one thing that I would add to that, I think that is helpful, but the thing that I would add that's really important about the deferred, that's a little bit different from a more traditional admissions process. Obviously, you're applying earlier, so you have a different focus, but the question that you want to proactively be thinking about, that the admissions committee is going to be asking, is why should we admit this person now, as opposed to considering them 3 to 4 years from now, when they might normally be applying. As a result, deferred admissions tend to be a lot more competitive, just in terms of the number that are applying, and the admit rate is much lower, because the thought is, and I was actually just at a conference with some colleagues, and in fact, I was in a session with the director, the dean of admissions at Stanford, and what she was saying is, she would see some amazing applicants to the deferred through their deferred process, but she also would wonder, well, I think this person's going to be even better 3 years from now or 4 years from now. So what you need to do as you're thinking about creating your application as a deferred applicant is to think about, what makes me good right now? How do I know, or how do I present that, so that the question won't be, well, I think this person's good, but they're going to be better 3 years, 4 years from now. And that can be a little bit tricky, because you don't necessarily know, well, maybe isn't everybody going to be hopefully better, 3 or 4 years from now? But you want to be able to make a really compelling case for why now you are so ready, and so you have so much potential that they can be confident that 2 years from now, when you actually matriculate. So the way, just logistically, is that you secure your admission, and then you're required to go work elsewhere for 2 years and then come back and matriculate. So the understanding is that you already have an offer in hand, and you already have a plan for those 2 years. Now, we know that might change. You may not stay at that place for 2 years, but there is a requirement that you work, and that you are granted admission in, whatever specific semester 2 years from when you're applying. And so it's just really important to think about how you're going to use that time in between. But I would say, lots of people want to secure their MBA, admission as a senior in college 2 years from now. So because a lot of people want to do it, it becomes a more competitive process. So I don't mean to sound like you shouldn't pursue that if you think it's the right fit for you, but your process is going to look a little bit different than a more traditional, someone who's been out for 3 or 4 years, which is the average when you're applying for business school. So getting some additional help with your candidacy, and I have worked with a couple of deferred admissions. I'll tell you, some of the people, I'm like, wow, I can't believe they didn't, get deferred admission. One really quick story: a gentleman who I worked with this year applied to HBS, Harvard Business School, as part of their deferral program 3 years ago. He was just a really fantastic. He sent me his deferred application. We did not work together on it. He was granted an interview at HBS, but he was not ultimately offered a position in their deferral program. He was amazing. I mean, his application was incredible. And I was like, wow, I honestly, I can't tell you anything was missing. It might have just been that there were other people that just were stronger. Fast forward 3 years, we worked with him on his application round this year. And he clearly, he's just knocked it out of the park over the last 3 years. Talk about someone taking, he was obviously, disheartened not to have received that offer. He really has just done amazing work. He's even better this year. His application was obviously even stronger 3 years later. And the fun and part of the story is that he's on his way to Stanford this fall. And so, does it work out that way for everyone? No, of course not. But my point is that if you are competitive for deferred admission and you don't receive an offer, usually those people are even stronger and at the top of the pack, 3 or 4 years later when you choose to reapply. So that's a happy ending to that story. Any other questions? And I don't know, Leslie, I think you can see the chat probably more easily than I don't want to click around too much because my Zoom is acting a little bit funny.
Sure. Taking care of the points of jumping career too often. This is a question: taking cue from the points of jumping the career too often, how will one be perceived if working in a role for more than 2 years, like a trainee and analyst? So I think 2 years for a traditional full-time MBA program is probably the minimum. I think most of the clients that we work with generally have much more experience, sort of 3, 5, 7 years experience in some cases. So
Leslie, can I ask, I'm not reading the question, but, and if this was your question, or if you want to, you know, unmute yourself to you know, ask it directly. But I wonder if maybe the person was asking about being 2 years in the same position, not necessarily showing growth, as opposed to only having worked 2 years. That's how I initially heard it.
Working in a role for more than 2 years, like a trainee analyst.
Got it.
So 2 years in the same role. I think it depends. I think it depends on what you've been doing. If there's been some visible, you know, career growth, if you've been given some big projects, if you've been given more management responsibility. Again, I think it just really goes back to what Caitlin said at the very beginning. This is your story. And we work with our clients in really unpacking and deeply understanding your particular story. So what a 2-year or 3-year program might look like for me would look very different than Caitlin, because we would have done really different types of work and had different types of exposures. You know, I always want to understand, you know, who are the kinds of people that you're working with? Is it a global environment? Is it, you know, all sorts of different nuances of your work environment that are also quite different. So that's just my high level thoughts. What about you, Caitlin?
Yeah, you know, I totally agree. And I would just add a couple of points. One is that I would always emphasize quality over quantity. So, you know, 2 years for one person, to your point, Leslie, may look completely different, you know, from 2 years with another person. If it looks like you're stagnant in a role, excuse me, that's one thing. The other thing I want to add, and I want to share just a quick anecdote with a client who is in a situation where he has been in the same role because of the pandemic and because of some policy changes in his company. They haven't been promoting. They haven't been, you know, doing things in the way that they normally would. So he hasn't been able to show the growth that he normally would. However, in terms of responsibility, he actually has been adding and continuing to progress. And so even though that's not demonstrated in a way that it might be with a change in salary, a change in title, he still is able to show that. That's something that he would want to supplement in an optional essay. And so I worked with coaching him on that. Like, how do you talk about that? So it doesn't sound like you're making excuses. You know, I didn't get the promotion because of the pandemic and because they froze all promotions, but here is, you know, here are the ways that I've continued to be able to build my skills. So that's a very specific example related to our current context. So again, the two things is quality over quantity. And the second is making sure that you're thinking about how do you demonstrate that, even if it's outside of the traditional way that, you know, you would show a different job title or whatever. And companies, organizations work differently. So it may look like you've been in the same job for 3 years, but in actuality, you've done a lot within that. And that's where our resume coaching can really help you, so that you're highlighting it in a way that shows that, even if it's somewhat non-traditional. So I hope that answers that question. If it doesn't, feel free to unmute yourself. I do want to be mindful of time because time is of the essence. If you do have more questions, Leslie and I both are available via email. I mentioned if you're interested in more conversations specifically about your background, your candidacy, how our coaching might be able to help you, certainly feel free to reach out and we can set that up. And, you know, in the meantime, hopefully you all have, like I say, gotten a few takeaways, actionable things to think about, ways that you can perhaps use consulting, use objective feedback as you're going through this introspective process, because it can be overwhelming to have someone tell you, well, you know what, you just need to sit down and you just need to do some thinking. And we all know that that can be hard to do. And so doing it in a structured way with assistance from other people can be a really valuable part of that process as you're beginning, you know, your application. And certainly before you dive into trying to write an essay. I have so many people come to me and they're like, I just need you to review my essay. And I'll start looking at the essay. I'm like, oh, no, this person needs to dial back quite a few steps. and that's okay. But making sure that you have time and space to do that will just ultimately result in a stronger application. And I've seen that, like I say, on both sides of the desk from my vantage point. So any closing thoughts, Leslie, or anything you want to leave people with before we sign off and send people on their way?
No, I would just thank everyone for spending your time with us. It's always a pleasure to talk with folks who are on the very, very beginning of their journey and just exploring the MBA experience. I had a wonderful MBA experience. I know Caitlin did too. And so we're excited for you and the journey you're about to embark on as and when it's right for you. I think there might have been a question in the chat here. How do we connect? And I think connecting with us is, Caitlin is a great first person to connect with. She's sort of the master coordinator of all the different pieces in terms of the work that I have with her. And so I would just encourage anyone just to shoot Caitlin an email, and you can further discuss your needs, and she can share more about the group that we have here at MBA Link. And
Leslie, I think that might be my new title, master of coordination.
The master of the magic that happens.
Just
master of all. But
Absolutely.
Thank you all for spending your time with us. We know everyone's busy, and we hope that this is just helpful, just to share, just general sharing, and good luck on your own journeys.
Yes, good luck, everyone. I will be following up as well, so you'll be hearing from me, and we can connect that way offline. And then obviously you have my email here. So have a wonderful evening, and hopefully we will be, I'll be reaching out because we will have our next session in our webinar series actually next week, and that will be focused on the actual narration, the actual essay creation and how you bring your narrative to life. So stay tuned for that. Hope you can join us. Thank you so much, Leslie, for spending time as well.
You're welcome.
We will be in touch soon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.